Why am I here dedicating time talking to you about sleep? Why do professionals specialize in the area of sleep? And why are there so many of you here interested in learning about sleep? Well, sleep is very important, and as many of you know, our bodies need sleep, and when we don't get sleep, we don't quite function the way we'd like to function. So sleep problems are very common in childhood. They're one of the most common concerns that parents bring to their pediatricians, to their physicians. Approximately 25% of children will have sleep difficulties at one point in their life. And these can range from less serious problems, so bedtime resistance, nighttime wakings, to the more serious, narcolepsy, sleep apnea, some of the more biologically, medically based disorders. Childhood sleep problems, while sometimes transient in that they creep up and just as quickly as they came, they go away, they can also be really sneaky and turn into chronic long-term problems if they're not treated properly. And so sleep problems in children are treatable and even preventable. So they have the potential, if parents set up certain rules, certain behaviors, it is possible to prevent sleep problems. If they do happen to develop, they are potentially treated as well, or easily treated with certain strategies. And as all of you, I'm sure, are aware, sleep problems have a tremendous impact on the family and everyone in the household. So when there's a child who's resisting going to bedtime or waking frequently throughout the night, that disrupts sleep for everyone in the house. So it turns into a family problem. It's not only the child who's affected by that sleep deprivation, but also everyone else in the house too. And sleep deprivation, has negative impacts on all sorts of areas of development. So I'm sure many of you know when you don't have a good night's sleep, you wake up, you're kind of in a fog, you're not concentrating very well, you're a little bit irritable. Same with kids. When they're not getting the sleep they need, we know it impacts their mood, we know it impacts their ability to concentrate at school, affects their school performance. And it also can impact their behavior as well. Many kids that I've worked with, they come in for behavioral difficulties. We do some monitoring and parents say, I've noticed that their behaviors and their outbursts and their temper tantrums are worse when they skip their nap. Well, it could be because they're not getting the sleep they need. Or they had a terrible sleep the night before. They only got 5 to 6 hours of sleep. And then the following day is a worse day for them. So it definitely impacts various areas of development. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about just some basic sleep facts. So what is typical sleep? How long should kids be sleeping? What's nap time like? And this is helpful for parents and professionals to know because it gives us some understanding about what is problematic sleep. So lots of times what parents might think are problems are actually just typical phenomenon in normal development, or maybe a sleep pattern that doesn't coincide with family activities planned or family schedules. So it turns, parents might think it's problematic when actually it might actually be a typical normal sleep pattern. And then we are going to talk about what parents can do to promote healthy sleep habits in their children and potentially prevent the development of chronic sleep problems. And then we will get into a discussion of some of the common sleep problems. Like I said, there's various sleep problems out there. I'm not going to be talking about some of the more medically based sleep problems, so I'm not going to be talking about sleep apnea or narcolepsy, but I'm going to be covering some of the more behaviorally based sleep problems. So bedtime resistance, night wakings, nighttime fears, nightmares, those sorts of behaviors. And then we will get into some strategies, what parents can do when their children do unfortunately develop some of these sleep problems. And then I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about sleep difficulties in children with developmental disabilities and other special needs. Although the problems aren't different, they tend to be more difficult to treat and more chronic. So we'll just spend a little bit of time talking about how the strategies can be modified for that population. Starting off, just talking about the basic sleep cycle. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but like I said, I think it's important for people to know what sleep looks like and what is typical sleep. Sleep in general comprises of two different states. So we have REM sleep, which is at the top there, and that's rapid eye movement sleep. That's the period of time where we're sleeping and when we're dreaming. And this actually occurs mostly in the second half of our sleep, and with the largest chunk happening right before we wake up. I'm not sure if you wake up, in the morning and you remember a dream. Dreams typically occur in the early morning. And then there's non-REM sleep, so non-rapid eye movement sleep. And this is broken down into 4 different stages. So stage 1 is kind of the sleep-wake transition, when we're just dozing off into sleep. When you're not too sure if you're awake, not too sure if you're sleeping, you're kind of aware of what's going on, but not really. Then there's stage 2, which is the first initiation of true sleep, albeit it is very light sleep. And then stage 3 and 4 are deep sleep. And most of this occurs actually in the first half of the night. And knowing when deep sleep occurs and when dreaming occurs is important for some of the sleep disorders, because some are more common in certain stages of sleep. So if we know if something's happening at the beginning of the night versus the end of the night, it helps us figure out what might be going on. And what's maybe of interest to many of you here, and you might not be aware of, is that it's typical for everyone, children, adults, to have anywhere from 4 to 8 brief arousals during the night. So if we see on this chart here, I don't have a laser, but these periods up here, when we're transitioning from deep sleep to lighter sleep, this graphic kind of hits the awake period there. So we actually are briefly aroused throughout the night. And this can happen without any awareness that we're aroused. Lots of times you wake up in the morning thinking, oh, that was a wonderful sleep. I didn't wake up once. You did, arouse very briefly, but it was so brief and you were so tired and you're able to fall back asleep so quickly that you didn't even notice. So these can occur without any disruption to sleep quality or sleep duration. But they can become problematic, and we're going to focus on this actually a lot during the presentation today, for those kids who aren't able to put themselves back to sleep and can't self-soothe. So then when they do have these typical, normal, occurring brief arousals, they can turn into extended night wakings that become quite problematic. And included this slide. It's lots of technical language, and it's not important that you understand the technical language. But I just wanted to talk briefly about how sleep is regulated. And in general, it's regulated by 2 processes. So we'll call the first one sleep pressure. So that's how well did we sleep last time? How long did we sleep? How long has it been since we last slept? So kind of that sleep debt, that sleep pressure is one of the processes that controls our sleep. And then there's the circadian clock, so the sleep clock, a part of our brain that helps us figure out to sleep at night and be awake during the day. And then interacting with these 2 processes are, I can't even pronounce that word properly, so I'm just going to say time givers. So those are things such as, light and darkness, the alarm clock, that help us regulate, that helps our sleep clock regulate itself. And in addition to light and dark, many other things are good time givers. So alarm clocks, when we eat, when we exercise, those also influence our sleep regulation. And it's because of these biological mechanisms that some people are biologically, pre-wired to be larks. People who, go to bed early and wake up early and are ready to go. And then there's those other people who are owls, who are, their natural sleep cycle might be, late. They're more alert during the evening. They're more likely to go to bed later and rise later. So there actually is some sort of biological predetermining reason why people prefer mornings versus people prefer evenings. Why sometimes it's more difficult to wake up in the wintertime because we don't have that light coming in our window to wake us up. So all of those sorts of things influence when we're sleeping and how long we're sleeping. Now this might be of interest to many of you here. What is typical sleep? How long should my child be sleeping? Many of you, if you have infants or if you have older children in the preschool age, they were all infant or newborns at one point in time. So you all know that newborn sleep is very irregular. They might sleep for 2 to 3 hours here, 2 to 3 hours there, then be awake for 2 or 3 hours, and this can occur, throughout the day, throughout the night. And then, by about 3 months, the sleep starts to become a little bit more regular, in that there'll be a larger chunk of sleep at night, and they'll be awake longer during the day. And then by about 6 months is when sleep starts to resemble adult sleep a little bit more, in that you're getting a much larger chunk at nighttime. And then at around toddlers, we are about 1 to 3 years of age. As you can see from the graph, their total sleep should be about 12 to 14 hours. In this age range, typically, one nap a day for anywhere from 1.5 to 3.5 hours of sleep during the day. And then preschoolers between the 3 and 5 year range, their average total sleep duration, so for the entire day, about 11 to 12 hours. And that may or may not include a nap. About 3/4 of kids are generally done napping around age 5, but some continue to need a nap beyond that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, about when to cut out the nap, or when to keep the nap, when it would be appropriate to do that. Now, it's also important to remember that the graph I just showed you is just that. It's a chart of averages. So while, if you take a big group of kids and average out what the kind of sleep they need, those are the numbers you get. But many people, adults, children, everyone has individual sleep needs. So some might require more than average to function well during the day, and some might function quite well an hour or two less than the average. So that's also important to keep in mind. So what is enough sleep? Well, enough sleep is just as much as it takes for your child to feel rested. So the best way to tell if your child is getting enough sleep is to look at their behavior and their functioning during the day. Parents know their children best. They're pretty good at picking up if their children are sleep deprived, if they need more rest, more sleep. So it might be helpful to ask yourself some of these questions. Are they falling asleep in the car? Do I have to, use a lot of energy to wake them in the morning? Am I pouring water on their face? Am I calling them several times? Look at their behavior during the day. Are they cranky? Are they aggressive? Are they a little bit hyper? Are they having trouble concentrating? And do they sometimes crash much earlier than their typical bedtime? If they're going to sleep at 8:30, 9 o'clock, are you finding some days they're just out, at 6, 7 o'clock for the whole night? It's likely that they're not getting enough sleep on a regular basis. Sometimes it's difficult to tell, if your child's getting enough sleep or how much sleep they really need. One thing that you can do, if possible, is if there's a holiday, extended time, if you have a week off, your kids have a week off, is just put them to bed at their regular bedtime, and let them sleep without a wake time in the morning, and see what time they spontaneously wake. After probably about 3 or 4 days, you might see a pattern. If they are sleep deprived, they're likely sleep a little bit longer the first night or two, just to catch up on that sleep they missed. But by day 3, 4, or 5, you might see that they are spontaneously waking, half an hour, 45 minutes later than you're usually waking them, and that's a good indicator that they may need a little bit more sleep than they're getting typically. And actually, 30 minutes, 45 minutes is a big difference. When we think about it, if we're trying to, fit more things into our schedule, we're likely as adults, to cut sleep. I'll just stay up an extra, 45 minutes tonight and get that done, or I'll set my alarm half an hour earlier tomorrow. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, 30 minutes, 45 minutes can make a big difference, especially with young children. So what can parents do to promote healthy sleep habits for their children? So we talked about a little bit when we talked about how sleep is regulated. Based on all of those variables, everyone has what we call a natural sleep onset time. So when our body is most ready to fall asleep. And if at all possible, if you're able to determine that for your child, that would be, looking at your child when they start to get a little bit groggy, start to get a little bit irritable, start to get slowing down, they're probably ready for bed. And that's probably an optimal time to be putting them to bed where they're, a little bit drowsy, but awake and ready to fall asleep. And so putting a child to bed at their optimal bedtime is more likely to lead to them falling asleep quicker and easier. So that's important, and that can minimize some of the bedtime problems and bedtime resistance when you're putting kids to bed before they're ready to go to bed. And also sometimes if we wait too long, they hit their second wind, and then it's more difficult for them to fall asleep as well. So finding that bedtime and keeping it consistent. So children who have regular sleep-wake cycles feel more rested. It's okay to make occasional exceptions, but too many exceptions too frequently can lead to some problems. And then look at the daytime sleep habits. So we already talked about it's common for preschoolers to have naps. But pay attention to the timing of the nap and the duration of the nap. So anything after 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon is going to likely interfere with their ability to fall asleep at night. And anything over 3 hours during the day is also likely going to interfere with their ability to fall asleep at night. Sometimes we get parents who are allowing their children to sleep so much during the day that they're fulfilling their total sleep hours during the day, and maybe having difficulty falling asleep at night, or rising early in the morning and not getting that big chunk of sleep at night. Establish a consistent bedtime routine. So for children, a bedtime routine should last anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes, contain 3 or 4 calm, relaxing activities, quiet activities to prepare your child for bed. So that could be brush teeth, put on pajamas, say prayers, read a story. Would be a typical bedtime routine. Sometimes it's helpful to save the child's favorite activity for last. So if there's a book that they really, really like, then the book comes at the end of the routine. Then they're more likely to comply with the beginning stages of the routine if they have their favorite activity to look forward to at the end of the routine. Also, it's important to not have any highly stimulating activities during that time. So no TV, no video games, no rough and tumble play chasing each other around the house. That just gets the kids revved up, and it's not the calm, relaxing activities that we're looking for. And actually research does show that having a TV or other media in a child's bedroom is related to sleep problems. So sometimes kids can get into the bad habit of learning to need the TV to fall asleep, and that's something that should be avoided. Provide transitional objects. So it's totally appropriate for young children to have transitional objects such as a blankie or a stuffed animal, anything like that, or a doll. This helps them, foster that independent, self-soothing behavior that they need to fall asleep on their own, and allows them to comfort themselves, when their parents aren't available. Use light to your advantage. So we talked about the importance of light for setting our sleep clock. So in the evening, keep the lights dim as bedtime approaches, and also in the morning, get your child into bright light. Take them outside if at all possible. That helps release a chemical or a hormone in the brain that will initiate sleep and help them wake up in the morning. And then avoid caffeine. So I'm sure many of you know you can't have coffee, an hour or two before you want to go to bed. Just like that, your children, so hot chocolate or chocolate, Cokes, Pepsis with caffeine should be avoided about 3 to 4 hours before bedtime. So when we talk about typical development and sleep problems, I just wanted to touch a little bit on some of the typically developing normal developmental milestones that happen during these early years, and how they can lead to an increase in sleep difficulties. So when children are able to start moving around on their own, well, that's when they can get out of their bed, and that's when they can wander around the house, and that's when they can wander into your room and climb into your bed. So just the nature of being able to move is likely to lead to some increasing sleep difficulties. They're developing imagination and fantasy. When they're able to imagine things that aren't there, that can lead to increase in nighttime fears. Their expressive language development, as they learn to speak and learn to express themselves, that means they can argue a lot more and protest and complain and try to negotiate. So something, I mean, it's wonderful when your child learns new words, they're able to express themselves, and you love chatting with them, but on the downside that means that they can complain a little bit more at bedtime. And so limit testing. So the very nature of being a toddler is testing limits, trying to establish autonomy and control over the situation. So not only in sleep, but in various other areas as well. Kids are going to push their parents, see what they can get away with, see what they're able to control. So that can also lead to difficulties at sleep. And then separation anxiety. So very early, children learn that their parents exist even though they can't see them. Around 8 months they can figure that out. So for a while it may be a little bit anxiety provoking for a child to know that their parent is somewhere and they're not with them. And to help with separation anxiety, having some transitional objects available to your children can be helpful for that as well. And usually separation anxiety in typically developing kids resolves around 3 or 4, and often if this is the reason for the night wakings, you'll see a dramatic decrease in the night wakings after that time. So I already mentioned how common sleep problems are. One study's found that about, up to a third, so 25 to 30% of toddlers may have one sleep disorder or sleep problem or another. And many of these children actually continue to have problems into the preschool period. And the most typical sleep problems in this age group are bedtime resistance, night wakings, and nighttime fears and nightmares. So that's what I'm going to spend the majority of the time talking about now. So bedtime resistance is actually one of the most common parental concerns, and this typically begins after age 2, when the child is mobile and able to leave their room. So these children may stall bedtime or refuse to go to bed, watch extra TV, ask for another story, ask to go to the bathroom 5 or 6 times, ask for more water. This probably sounds familiar to a lot of you here, I'm sure. And the thing is that children are pretty smart and are pretty good at figuring out what their parents will respond to and what their parents will give into. A typical example, and especially during this age period, often potty training is another developmental task that everyone's working on. So if your child says, "Mom, I have to go to the bathroom," you're probably going to be right up there and, "Oh good, she wants to go to the bathroom, let's go to the bathroom." But children will quickly pick up, "Oh, the bathroom, that's how I get out of bed." And they can be asking for 3 or 4 trips to the bathroom. So figuring that out and setting some limits around that is really important. So often bedtime resistance is more common in families with parents who have trouble setting those limits. What are the rules of bedtime? What is acceptable? What isn't acceptable? And also, bedtime resistance is common in families where children aren't required to fall asleep in their bed or in the same place every night. So some children are able to, fall asleep on the couch, fall asleep watching TV, fall asleep in mom and dad's bed, and then mom and dad will transfer them to their own bed once they fall asleep. And if you just imagine yourself waking up if you fell asleep in your bedroom and then woke up in the living room on the couch, how disturbing and distracting that might be. And also, I just wanted to comment again about the importance of finding an optimal bedtime, because sometimes bedtime resistance isn't always because parents are having trouble setting limits or children are resisting going to bed, but maybe the child's been put to bed an hour and a half earlier than they're ready to go to bed. So that means they might legitimately be having difficulties falling asleep, which can lead to some bedtime resistance behaviors. So what can a parent do in these situations? It's important to establish clear bedtime rules. So what activities are involved in the routine? What is a child allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? So being very specific. 1 trip to the bathroom, 1 drink, you're not allowed to get out of bed, one story, making it very clear you're not allowed to get out of bed. You're not allowed to complain to mom. So letting them know what is and isn't allowed is really important. Although that being said, I'm trying to make you sound very strict and rigid. It's also helpful sometimes to incorporate some choice into the bedtime routine as well. So would you like to wear your green pajamas or your blue pajamas tonight? Would you like to read story A or story B tonight? So giving the kids some sort of sense of limited control might increase their compliance and make them more cooperative. Ignore complaints and protests. So kids are likely going to not like the changes you're trying to make. They're going to do their best to try and get things back the way they used to be. So they'll probably complain and protest. But it's important that you avoid discussing, avoid arguing about bedtime, and most important is not to give the children extra attention inadvertently by discussing and arguing with them. They're getting that parental attention, and I think sometimes parents underestimate the importance of parental presence or parental attention as a reward or a reinforcer for parents. Children are sometimes just as happy to be arguing with their parents as having a pleasant conversation with their parents. Just that interaction and that attention that they're getting from their parent is actually quite powerful, and I think sometimes that's underestimated. So if your child gets up out of bed, return them to their bed, remind them what the rules are. This time there's no hug and there's no kiss before bed. You got out of bed, we already did that. That was part of your other routine. This time it's just very boring, very brief. Escort them back to bed, remind them of the rules, and leave them be. And so if your child gets upset or starts crying, it's okay to check on your kids. That's allowed. Sometimes kids, you have to, I guess, make the distinction between those mild complaints and protests and genuinely, being upset and crying. And checking on your kids is fine. You just want to make those visits very brief and very boring. Go in, reassure them that you're there, you haven't gone anywhere. Avoid physical contact, avoid physical comfort, and leave the room. And you might want to institute a regular checking schedule. So let's say every 5 minutes, go in and check on your kid. It's just important not to give them that extra attention. And by using a regular interval, you're not checking on the kids isn't dependent on their behavior and their crying out behavior. So you're not inadvertently reinforcing that behavior that we're trying to decrease. You can use positive reinforcements. So using a sticker chart or a reward system for kids when they follow through with their bedtime routine. For younger kids, these rewards need to be more immediate. So in the morning, immediately reward them. Parents know best what's motivating and what their children like. For some, stickers are highly motivated and they're quite pleased to continue to get stickers. Other kids, stickers might not do it, so you might need to think of something else. Older kids, the older preschool age kids, you might be able to use some sort of token system in that where they earn points over the week, and at the end of the week they get to exchange their tokens or their points or their stickers, whatever you might be using for a larger reward. You can also consider a later bedtime. Now this might be a little bit counterintuitive given what I've already talked about, the importance of adequate sleep, but this later bedtime would just be temporary. So putting your children to bed maybe 15, 20 minutes after they are typically falling asleep. So if your child has a bedtime of 8 o'clock and you notice, they're usually not falling asleep till around 9 o'clock, putting them to bed at 9:15 when they're likely to be more tired and fall asleep quickly. They're more likely to comply with their bedtime routine if they're more tired. And then once you've established that quick sleep onset, so they're falling asleep quickly, then you can start gradually moving the bedtime backwards. And the importance is doing it gradually. So maybe 10 minutes a night. So if it's 9:15, then moving it back to 9:05 for a couple nights, and then move it back to 8:55 for a couple nights, and gradually move it back to the desired bedtime of 8 o'clock. And that can be a good idea when dealing with kids with some bedtime resistance problems. And also the importance of being consistent. We already talked about how children test limits, the behavior, not only in sleep behaviors, but whenever you're trying to change any child behavior, it's important for parents to expect that the behavior is going to get worse before it gets better. So the kids are going to push, they're going to complain, they're going to try their best to test the limits and see, is mom and dad, are they really serious about these new behaviors? I'll see, what I can get away with. And once they figure out, oh, mom and dad are really serious, then it's likely that you'll start to see an improvement in the behavior. It's also important to be consistent with behavior change. Because when you occasionally give in to a child's behavior, you're actually doing the opposite of what you're intending to do. You're actually making the behavior stronger. And the best analogy that I've come across to help explain to parents is the idea of a slot machine. So everyone knows how fun, slot machines are. You never know when the prize is going to come, but you know it's going to come. So you pull the lever. Oh, it didn't happen this time. You pull it again. It didn't happen. You pull it again. Oh, look, I got the jackpot. I won. Oh, I wonder how many more times I have to pull the lever before it's going to happen again. And you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. And that's why gambling is so addictive, because it works on that reinforcement schedule. So when you're occasionally giving in to your child, you're actually reinforcing the behavior more, because they know, well, eventually mom's going to give in. She always does. I'm just going to have to keep doing this and doing this until she gives in. So that's the importance of being consistent. So now we'll move on to talking about night wakings. So we already talked about how the brief arousals are normal for kids, for adults, for everyone. And so young children can briefly awaken in the middle of the night, every 90 minutes, as frequently as every 90 minutes, which, if they can't fall asleep on their own, can potentially lead to some prolonged night wakings and sleep disruptions for the children and everyone else in the house as well. So these are the children who have difficulty falling back asleep on their own. So a child who's put to bed, drowsy but awake, and learns to fall asleep using self-soothing strategies. When they wake up in the middle of the night, they've learned the skills to soothe themselves back to sleep. So those brief arousals in the middle of the night are less problematic. On the other hand, children who learn to fall asleep accompanied by some parental behavior, whether that be just simply having the parent present, or being rocked to sleep, or having their back rubbed to sleep, they're likely going to have difficulty falling back to sleep in the middle of the night because those same conditions aren't available when they wake. So we call those sleep onset associations. So what your child associates with falling asleep. So just for an example, a child who is rocked to sleep in their parents' arms and put into bed asleep, they've associated falling asleep with being rocked in their mother's arms. So when they wake up in the middle of the night for that normal, typical brief arousal, they haven't learned how to fall back asleep on their own. They require that rocking to put them back to sleep, so they're likely to signal to their mom to come and rock them back to sleep. So many of you might be wondering, when should your child be sleeping through the night? So we've already talked about the newborns. They sleep whenever, on and off, throughout the day, throughout the night. By 4 months of age, you should be getting a good chunk, about a 6 to 8 hour chunk at night, and around 6 months, 10 to 12 hours at night. But even though these babies might be sleeping 12 hours a night, that's not to say they're not waking. They will be waking in the middle of the night. They've just learned how to soothe themselves back to sleep. So as a parent, you may not be aware that they're waking at all. And by about 6 months of age, the majority of babies are sleeping through the night. And these are the babies who've developed good sleep onset associations that are able to soothe themselves back to sleep, whereas the ones with the wrong or more negative sleep onset associations are the ones that are crying out And it's important to know that sleeping through the night is often a milestone that can be established, but then it can go away. So you might say, oh, my child was sleeping through the night so well for a couple of months there. I don't know what's happened. Now she's waking all the time. Often this isn't maturational in any way, but it's probably something social. So maybe they got sick and they were having more night wakings. And when you have a sick infant or you have a sick child, you're going to respond to that sick child. That's something that I should comment on. When your child's sick, you comfort your child. Unfortunately, when situations like that happen, that can lead to a setback in some of the progress that you've been making with the sleep modification behaviors. But it's just important to know as soon as the child's better, return to the old or to the new routine. And you might have to do a little bit of extra work to get the sleep back to where it used to be. And the last point there, about 1/3 of children up to age 4 will continue to have wake during the night and require parental attention. So in these situations, what can parents do to help their children? Well, since, as we've discussed, night wakings are typically because children haven't learned how to fall asleep independently on their own at the initial bedtime. The effective interventions focus on increasing the child's independence at bedtime and, as a consequence, decreasing parental involvement at the bedtime. So the first strategy, a very well-researched strategy, very well established in the literature, lots of support, is extinction. Some of you might know it as, cry it out, let them cry it out. So this involves, putting the child to bed at a specific time and ignoring them until morning time. Although this is well documented and effective, parents are often concerned about the negative effects this may have on their child. And actually there is no documented study that I'm aware of that mentions any actual negative effects that the research has found. It's very understandable why this would be difficult for parents to let their child, especially if you have children who have very strong lungs and can cry and cry and cry for 4 to 5 hours. It's very reasonable. Sometimes the research tells us what to do, but sometimes it's just not practical for parents to use those strategies. So that's one of the major arguments against using this approach. So know that it works, and if you can tolerate your child screaming and yelling, as difficult as it may be, this is the most effective and it's likely to work the quickest. That being said, there is alternatives to using this approach. So the graduated extinction involves ignoring, but it implements some of the checking, parental checking that we talked about earlier as well. So this would involve putting your child to bed drowsy but awake, and then waiting progressively longer periods over time before checking on them. So for example, okay, it's night 1, you're starting your sleep behavior modification program, which I should mention, I don't think I have this anywhere else in my presentation, you shouldn't consider modifying sleep behavior until after 6 to 8 months of age. Before that, sleep patterns are still developing. It's going to be a little bit erratic. It's going to take some time for kids to establish good sleep routines and cycles. So not before 6 to 8 months of age would you consider doing some of these procedures. But the graduated extinction, so putting your child to bed drowsy but awake and waiting 5 minutes, going in, checking on the child, keeping it very brief, very boring, reassure them, mommy's here, or daddy's here, it's okay, go to sleep. And then leaving the room. Avoid touching, avoid physical comfort, if at all possible. That will make things easier and a little bit quicker. And then you wait 10 minutes before sleeping or before checking on the child, and check on them the same way. And then next time wait 15 minutes before checking on the child. And then every 15 minutes after that. The idea being that the child will likely fall asleep during one of those 15-minute intervals when you're not there. So they're learning to fall asleep without their parent present. Then the following night, you might wait 10 minutes, for example, the first time before checking, and then 15 minutes for the second check, and then 20 minutes for the third check, and every check after that, and continue for the third day, 15, 20, 25, and then be checking every 25 minutes. After that. And the times I gave you are just examples, 5, 10, 15 minutes. Really, research hasn't been able to find any optimal checking time to wait in between checks. It's really dependent on the parent's tolerance of the child behavior and the child screaming. So it's better to start with something that's doable for the parent. So if we recommend 5 minutes and the parent knows full well that they're not going to be able to wait 5 minutes, then there's no point in us recommending that wait period. If the parent can wait 1 minute or 2 minutes, it's best to start with where you guys are ready and what you can tolerate and work your way up from there. It might take a little bit longer, but at least coming up with a program that you know that you can follow through with and you can be consistent with is more important than the actual checking time. But also keeping in mind that checking too frequently can be more disruptive than helpful. So finding a balance there is important. And I just wanted to also comment on how difficult it is for parents using these procedures. Listening to your child cry, no one likes to hear their children cry, so it's very difficult. So if you can get some sort of support, whether it be your spouse, take turns with who's going to be the one listening to the child. If often, this is a stereotype, but often fathers have difficulty hearing their little girls cry, or sometimes fathers, oh, crying doesn't bother me, and it's the mothers that can't cry or can't listen to their kids cry. It can be helpful to send the other parent away. Well, you go next door and have coffee, and I'll do the sleep modification tonight. I'm better able to listen to her cry. It doesn't get to me the way it gets to you. That's entirely acceptable. And eliciting help from others. So if you're alone at night trying to get your child to bed, inviting a friend over to distract you, keep yourself busy, play some cards, watch a TV show together, someone there who can support you and, no, only 1 more minute, you can do it, just wait, and remind you about the goals that you're trying to reach and how far you've come, and you don't want to undo what you've done. And then I've already commented on when your child is sick. It's important to comfort and care for your child when they're sick, but know when they're better, it's important to return to the routines and the rules that you had established. And then the third alternative there is parental fading. So for parents who aren't comfortable with the above-mentioned extinction procedures, there's a fading procedure where adult presence or involvement or attention is faded over time. So often parents are sleeping in their child's bed or lying with them. That's often children or parents will come in and explain that's the situation, that's what's going on. They don't think they can ignore, or maybe they've tried extinction, they just can't tolerate it. It's not the procedure for them. So we would recommend the parental fading procedure. So if a parent's lying in bed with their child, they might then the next night sit on the side of their child's bed and do that for a couple of nights. And then the next night sit at the foot of the bed for a couple nights. And then bring up a chair and sit next to the bed for a couple nights and gradually move their way outside of the bedroom until they're no longer in the bedroom and the child's falling asleep independently. While this procedure can be effective, just remember it takes more time on the parent's behalf, so they have to be willing to, I guess they're already lying in bed with the child, so, but be willing to, every night be available for the child until they fall asleep. And also it's more likely to take longer, so it might be several weeks before the child is sleeping on their own versus the extinction procedures, which usually after about 3 or 4 nights you'll start to see some improvement, and after 1 to 2 weeks generally you'll see children sleeping independently is what the research tells us. And then also reinforcement strategies. We can never underestimate the importance of reinforcing positive behaviors. So when the child, They might wake several times throughout the night, but they don't call out to mom or dad in the morning, immediately rewarding them for their sleeping through the night. And then just the last point there about delaying respondings to night wakings. So sometimes we might hear our kids, squirm around or groan or cry. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're awake. They might be making noises as they're transitioning through sleep stages. So delaying your response to your child and allowing them the opportunity to fall back asleep on their own is important. So if you hear your child, grumble or move around, thinking, oh, they must be awake, maybe wait an extra 3 or 4 minutes and see if they fall back asleep on their own. And if they don't fall back asleep on their own, it's okay to respond. But again, remember, keep the visits brief and boring, and you don't want to give them any positive attention. And what the research tells us is that after children learn to fall asleep independently on their own at bedtime, after about 1 or 2 weeks, that behavior will generalize to the night wakings. So typically we would recommend that parents implement these procedures for bedtime only, and then they can respond to the night wakings as they were before. And then after the child learns to fall asleep independently on their own at bedtime, when they're waking in the middle of the night, after about 1 or 2 weeks, they will have learned those skills and they'll be able to put themselves back to sleep. You could probably imagine what it'd be like doing the bedtime fading 4 or 5 times a night when your child keeps waking throughout the night. So for the sanity of everyone involved, and luckily those skills tend to generalize to the night wakings. You don't need to worry about responding to the night wakings in the same way that you're responding at the initial bedtime. So what about those parents who are lucky enough and blessed to have children that like to wake at 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the morning? I have to say I feel very bad for those parents. I mean, because parents like to sleep in, and I'm sure they would like their children to follow their sleep schedules exactly to get the optimal sleep time. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So these kids are usually grouped into 2 clumps. So we have the one group that their early morning waking is likely just a final night waking. So if we think they have 4 to 8 arousals during the middle of the night, this just might be their 8th one. And for some reason, this behavior might be being reinforced by parents. So parents wanting to stay in bed and get extra sleep might invite their child, oh, you can come into my bed at 4:30, or oh, just go watch TV at 4:30. So that can be reinforcing that final night waking, whereas if they were required to return to bed or stay in their room, they might be falling back asleep because it's likely that they need more sleep. But then there's the other group of kids who are just early risers. They wake at 5:30 in the morning and they're well rested, they don't need more sleep, and they're just ready to start their day. So those would be the larks that we were talking about earlier, the kids who just are biologically pre-wired to wake early in the morning. So even if you do have a lark, there are many things that parents can do to teach their children to sleep later, or simply just stay in bed longer in the morning, allowing the rest of the family to get some sleep. So it might be helpful to monitor your child's behavior over a couple of weeks and see if there's any patterns that emerge. See if you can figure out why they're waking early in the morning, or if there's some behavior that's somehow reinforcing why they're waking up early in the morning, why when they wake at 5:30 they're excited to get out of bed rather than stay in bed. So there might be some other reasons why your child's waking early. So some kids are more sensitive to light than other kids. So using solid thick blinds, hanging a blanket over the window, or putting a towel over the window to keep the morning sun out can help them sleep in later. or noise, both inside and outside. So keeping the windows closed would be important. Muffle the sound from outside using a blanket or curtain above the windows. If possible, move your child's bedroom to a part of the house that's more quiet. And also eliminate inside noise. So don't go into your sleeping child's, room unless necessary. And sometimes if there's siblings, that could be difficult, but trying to keep the noise down, so maybe making the older siblings sleep somewhere else or play somewhere else, or engage in some quiet behaviors during that time. And actually, hunger. Some kids can be trained by their bellies to wake up early. So lots of kids wake up because their bellies tell them to wake up. So if early risers are used to eating breakfast immediately after waking, it's kind of that time of day that they're used to eating. So their stomach's telling them, okay, time to wake up, it's time to eat. So they might have learned to wake up in anticipation of food. In these circumstances, what parents can do is just delay feeding them breakfast by 10 minutes every couple of days. So if your child's waking at 5:30, for example, and they're used to eating breakfast shortly thereafter at 5:40, when they wake, delay breakfast until 5:50 for a couple of days, then delay it to 6 o'clock for a couple of days, and gradually delay breakfast until they're eating about an hour later. And you might see that they start to sleep in a little bit longer because their bellies aren't used to being fed that early in the morning. Then there's the children who just need less sleep. Nothing's waking them because they need more sleep and their sleep's being interrupted for any reason. They're just the kids who need less sleep than everyone else. So what you can do is consider changing their bedtime. So gradually delaying their bedtime by 10 minutes every couple of nights. So the same idea. Whenever you're trying to manipulate bedtimes or wake times or nap times or meal times, it's really important, especially with young kids, that everything be done very gradually. If you try to delay something in too big of chunks of time, it's going to be more difficult. But if it's done gradually, so 10 minutes every couple of nights, it's more likely to be effective. So gradually delay bedtime by 10 minutes every couple of nights until the child's going to bed an hour later. That's a potential. Some parents are concerned that if they do that, their child will continue to wake at the same time early in the morning, and the only result is that they're getting less sleep. Unfortunately, the only way we could figure that out is if we actually try it. And it might take a week or two actually to see the changes. So it's important for parents to expect that, okay, I've been putting them to bed at 9 o'clock now instead of 8 o'clock for 3 days, and I'm still not seeing anything. That's to be expected. But over time, they're likely to build up that sleep debt and start to sleep in later. So a good 1 to 2 weeks would be a good time to try that out and see if you can delay waking up in the morning any more. And it's important, if you're delaying bedtime, that you're also delaying naps and delaying meal times too. So you want to keep their daily routine consistent, but just delaying it all. So naps and meals are important too. You can consider adjusting nap time. So many early risers are also accustomed to having early morning naps, and those early morning naps can be reinforcing that early morning waking. So parents can discourage those early morning naps, again, by gradually delaying them 10 minutes every couple of days. So if your child's waking at 6:30 or 6 o'clock, and they're usually going for a nap by 8:30, gradually delaying that nap, because then the kids won't be accustomed to it kind of ends up just being like a break, maybe an extended night waking. That way, if they're going for a nap so early in the morning, they likely need a little bit more sleep in the morning. And also, I mentioned this earlier, consider limiting the amount of daytime sleep. So some kids are fulfilling their total sleep during the day rather than at night. That being said, we wouldn't recommend eliminating a nap if a child needs a nap, in the hopes that they'll make up for that sleep at nighttime. So it takes some investigative work from parents to figure out if they need a nap, or if they don't need a nap. You might try a trial period of no nap and find that your child's functioning just fine during the day without a nap, and then they start to make up that sleep at nighttime. You can also just teach your child to play quietly in bed. With younger kids, they can put up a mirror next to their child's bed or a mobile, keep some soft toys, soft books available, and teach your kids what quiet play is like in the morning time, giving them opportunities to entertain themselves and amuse themselves in their bed without parental attention. Now, to do that, you'll likely have to make some rules. So let kids know when they're allowed to get out of bed. Some parents have used an alarm clock. If your child is a little bit older and they understand numbers, you're not allowed to get out of bed until the digital clock says 700. You're not allowed to get out of bed until that time. Other parents have used a night light on a timer. So the night light is set to go off at 7 o'clock. You're not allowed to get out of your bedroom until the light goes off. Or you're not allowed to get out of your bedroom until mom or dad comes to get you. So those are strategies that can help. These are the kids, again, who don't need extra sleep, so we're not going to be able to force them to sleep, but we can provide them with opportunities and strategies to entertain themselves and stay in their room and play quietly and have some quiet time, which will allow everyone else in the house to get the sleep that they need. Especially with young kids, it's important to practice. Practice quiet time sleep, the night before or, throughout the day, so they get used to what toys are appropriate, what can I do when everyone else is asleep and I'm awake in the morning. And like all other behaviors, you can reinforce them for following through and for staying in their bedroom. So every morning that they stay in their bedroom until 7 o'clock or whatever time the parents have designated, they get their reward. Okay, and then we have the group of kids who have nighttime fears or nightmares. So fears at nighttime are very common and typically not harmful. And they're usually considered a normal part of development. And kids' fears usually follow a developmental progression. So earlier on, it might be about being separated from their parents, strange places, and then it might be once their imagination starts to develop, fear of the dark, imaginary creatures, and then as they get a little bit older, social situations, natural disasters. So common things that children are afraid of. And although benign and not usually harmful, these fears must be differentiated from some of the more pathological fears and nightmares that might be more similar to an anxiety disorder. So if you have concerns about fears or nightmares and you're finding that they're not just at nighttime but also during the day, or the nightmares are affecting the child's behavior during the day, that's something that might be less harmful and should maybe be discussed with a professional involved with you and your children. And so nightmares are frightening dreams that usually result in the child waking up. And the content usually is consistent with the developmentally appropriate fears that we talked about. And they're very common. So 75% of children will report experience at least one nightmare, and about 24% of children will report that nightmares it's a chronic problem for them. And it's important to know that sleep deprivation actually contributes to nighttime fears, nightmares, and actually all sorts of sleep problems as well. And I just wanted to include a brief slide here on the difference between nightmares and sleep terrors. Sometimes people can get them confused. So this is one area where knowing what stage of sleep occurs is quite helpful. So we know that sleep terrors, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but sleep terrors happen during non-REM sleep, so during the deep sleep. So we know that is more abundant in the first half of the night. And nightmares, which is when we're dreaming, is during REM sleep, and we know that occurs in the second half of our sleep. And sleep terrors are more common in children between the ages of 3 and 8, and that's because this is when deep sleep is at its peak. Children during this age are spending more time during deep sleep than they are at any other time in development. And that's why if you've had experience with sleep terrors, people will tell you, oh, they'll likely outgrow it. And that's true. It's because they're spending less time in deep sleep over time, so there's less opportunities for night terrors to occur. So they look different. So when a child is having a night terror, they might suddenly sit up and scream. They might be inconsolable. They might, if it's accompanied with sleepwalking, be walking around the house. I just had a conversation with a mom today. Just the other day, her child decided to pee in the living room during one of his sleep terrors. That's not uncommon. She described it as a very scary experience. She was very concerned for her son. You know, he's yelling and screaming. He was apparently a very calm and happy little boy, but during his sleep terror, he was very angry and yelling and screaming, and she was concerned for that reason. But one thing about sleep terrors is the child is totally unaware of the event. They're asleep. And when they wake up in the morning, they'll have no recollection of the event. So it's often very scary to witness, and it's more traumatic probably for you as a parent to see your child having a night terror than it actually is for the child to be experiencing it, because they won't remember it and they have no recollection of the event, and they don't remember it, or they're not awake while it's happening. Whereas nightmares, children often wake up and are able to recall the content of their nightmares. And so both nightmares and sleep terrors are perpetuated by stress or lack of sleep. So in both situations, attempts should be made to alleviate the stress if you can identify it and ensure that the child's getting adequate sleep. And like I said, in most circumstances, sleep terrors will resolve themselves over time. So when children are having sleep terrors, it's important not to wake them. That could be distressing to them. Just ensure their safety, that they're not walking near the stairs and they're going to fall down if they're also sleepwalking during their night terrors. Just direct them back to their bed. And really, because the children have no recollection of the event, there's really no need to discuss the event with them. Sometimes if parents, talk to their kids, do you know what you did last night? This is what you did. The child can get scared. Well, I don't want to do that. I'm scared, Mommy. I don't want to go to sleep because I don't want that to happen again. So there's really no need to discuss the event. Whereas nightmares, as I'm going to discuss on the next slide, are something that parents can discuss and reassure their kids about. So when a child wakes up and has a nightmare, what can parents do? Reassure their child that they're safe, you're nearby. That can be helpful. But also be careful not to provide too much attention for those fearful behaviors. And it's probably best to wait until the next morning to discuss the details of the dream. You might be able to figure out if there was a specific stressor. Did they watch a scary movie? Did they read a scary book? And also just everyday stressors. So have you recently moved? Is it at the start of a new school year? So just common everyday stressors can also trigger nightmares as well. You can be creative too with your kids. Read stories about kids who are brave and have conquered their fears. Draw a picture of the nightmare and crumple it up and throw it in the garbage. Creative ideas like that can help children as well. Devise a different end to the dream and practice reciting that. The kids might start to have the pleasant ending of the dream instead of the scary ending. Security objects, those transitional objects, can be comforting and help the child fall asleep faster. It's okay to leave the door open, provide your child with a night light to reduce the fear of the dark or being alone. Remind the child that they're safe in their bedroom and mom and dad are right next door. I've had a couple of cases where we've taken pictures of mom and dad sleeping in their bed and framed it and put it on the child's bedstand. So when they wake up in the middle of the night, they have that picture. Oh yeah, this is where mom and dad are. They're asleep in their bed. And just that visual reminder of that's where mom and dad are. Again, you can institute a checking system like we've already discussed. So for example, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, and doing it at regular intervals makes it not dependent on the child's crying out behavior. So you're not running to your child every time they say, "Mommy, I'm scared." And positive reinforcement, it keeps coming up on every single slide. So rewarding your child for appropriate bedtime behaviors. So reinforce staying in bed all night. And also just thinking about reducing the likelihood of nightmares, so avoiding exposure to scary stimuli, reducing stressors, and ensuring adequate sleep. Okay, so I'm running out of time quickly here, so I'm just going to quickly overview some of the important points to remember. So the importance of naps, how many they're having, when they're occurring, how long they're occurring, knowing that there's a total sleep for a 24-hour period, and some kids might be using all of their sleep during the day and not have enough sleep left at night, or their naps might be too late, which is interfering with their ability to fall asleep. Sleep onset associations, so that being the condition that the child's learned to associate with falling asleep, whether it be a certain event being rocked, or mommy or daddy being present, or certain objects. And also optimal bedtime. We talked about you can put your child to bed too early. You can also put them to bed too late. And the importance of sleep schedules and routines, and being consistent, and keeping the behaviors before bed relaxing. And I just have a couple slides here on children with special needs. And like I said at the beginning, sleep problems in this population are not different. They're just more common and more intense. So for example, if you think of children with autistic spectrum disorders, by the nature of the diagnosis, they have difficulties with social cues, environmental cues, and often communication delays as well. So reading those cues, oh look, everyone's putting their pajamas on, oh the lights are going off, it must be bedtime, that's less obvious to those kids. Children with Down syndrome, I didn't talk about sleep apnea today, but it's known that children with Down syndrome have higher incidences of sleep apnea, and also some other sleep disorders as well. Children with brain injuries, often if it's a part of the brain that affects the sleep-wake cycle, they're going to inherently have difficulty falling asleep and regulating their sleep appropriately. And then children with their sensory difficulties, so children who are blind or visually impaired, they don't have that light-dark input to help them regulate their sleep schedules. So that can lead to difficulties. Also children on medications, there's several medications out there that can interrupt sleep, whether it be the ability to fall asleep or the ability to stay asleep, or early wakings. For example, stimulant medications, although are uncommon in the age group we're talking about today, but in older children, are known to delay sleep onset. Typically, stimulant medications will delay sleep by about an hour, is what the research says. So if you're a child, if you have older children who are on stimulant medications and it's taking them, 2-3 extra hours to fall asleep, that's something that you should discuss with your physician, because they likely may need a different medication or a change of dose as well. So the interventions are the same, but special considerations are warranted. So, for example, using visual aids to help with the routine, having a picture schedule of pajamas, teeth, prayers, story, to help the kids make the routine more obvious to them, and provide them with reminders and keep consistency. And you may need to make the routine more specific. So they might need to be told exactly what to do when going to bed. So for instance, draw the curtains, get into bed, turn off the light, breaking the steps down more specifically than you would for typically developing children. Using social stories or other stories, they might not understand the need for sleep. Why is mom making a big deal about me falling asleep? What do people do when I'm sleeping? Like, what's going on in the world when I'm sleeping? That they're safe when they're sleeping, and helping them understand some of those concepts. And also safety is important to concern. So some of the behavioral strategies of ignoring might not be appropriate for children who have certain medical conditions. So maybe children with seizures, it might be not be appropriate to ignore those kids, or have them sleeping in a different room, for example, if they have frequent seizures throughout the night. And also kids with physical impairments who need help being physically manipulated or repositioned at night. It's more difficult for those parents to ignore them. So the importance is to just make the bedroom safe, and if kids are getting up in the middle of the night, you can be comforted that at least they'll be safe. There's nothing in their room that they can hurt themselves with. And the strategies might need to be even more gradual and might just take longer. So instead of doing 10 minutes every 2 nights, it might be 5 minutes every 3 or 4 nights. And by that effect, it'll take longer probably to see effects. And then I just wanted to talk briefly about melatonin, because I know it's a common medication, and some of you might have discussed it with your physician or read an article or heard about it. So melatonin is the hormone in the brain that's released I think it's about 2 or 3 hours before we start to go to bed, that prepares our brain for sleep. And it's triggered by darkness, and then it's inhibited by light in the morning. And there's some research out there to say that children with autistic spectrum disorders might have lower levels of melatonin in their brains, and that's why they have difficulty regulating their sleep. And I just wanted to make a note that medication should be the last resort in treating sleep problems in children, because there's so many behavioral strategies that we know are effective. That being said, sometimes medications are appropriate, and with medications such as melatonin, although it is available over the counter and no prescription is required, it's very important that you give your child melatonin under the direction of a physician or a medical professional, because the timing and the dose of the melatonin can have different effects on the behavior. So how much is taken and when it's taken has different effects. So it's important that that be monitored by someone who understands that. And then I just wanted to talk about where you can go. Unfortunately, there's no specific pediatric sleep service available here, but psychologists are wonderful people who are able to help with these problems, and I have the website for psychologists in Nova Scotia. You can type in a problem that you're looking for, and they'll come up with a list of psychologists available. There's also mental health central referral. Often children with sleep difficulties often have other behavioral problems as well, or developmental issues, so they can get referred to services for those reasons, and then sleep may be able to be addressed. You can always speak with your family physician, public health nurse, and also there's lots of resources available at the library, the bookstore, and I just have a few up here that I would recommend. Solve Your Child's Sleep Problems and Healthy Sleep Habits, Healthy Child. These books will provide step-by-step guides to modifying your child's sleep, and would just reiterate what was presented here today. And the other 2 books by Mindell, the first one, Sleeping Through the Night, is appropriate for infants and toddlers, I believe, and then Take Charge of Your Child's Sleep is for school-age children, preschool children, school-age children, and teenagers.